Okay, so how do you want to start this one?
Well, I figured that actually sounds like a great way to open.
Yeah.
So our topic actually is something that I started thinking about yesterday. I don't know specifically why, like I have some theories on why it came to mind, but it seemed very fitting for a discussion for us because it's something that I think we're far more qualified to discuss anyway, because it's philosophical or ideological, whichever way you want to think of it. But before we get into all of that, I do
You
have
got
two
some
quick bites.
I like how I think we've consistently had, and by we, you have consistently had 2 bites for us.
I've been trying to be consistent about it. I figure you don't want to hear a whole lot of current events, especially if you end up listening to the show later.
Right.
So I try to pick things that kind of influence either thought or discussion or just something that, hey, you may not have seen this, maybe pay attention to it, those types of things. The first one doesn't fit any of those categories. The first one is very much just a continuation of a lot of the things that we've talked about in general. It kind of fits with other themes. Biden has officially called for Putin to be investigated as a war criminal as of Monday, the 4th of April. I think that's great. I don't know what comes out of it, but it feels like it's at least progress in this whole mess of things that we haven't seen any type of fulfilling or satisfactory progress in, from my perspective. At least this marks an official inquiry into potential action. I think that's the way I at least view it. The article specifically just calls out that after discovery of mass graves and streets lined with bodies of dead civilians, after Russians retreated or were driven back from around Kiev, that basically this seems to be clear-cut evidence of atrocities and war crimes, and we should proceed as such. That's the gist of the article.
Yeah.
And I don't have anything else to really say on it. It's just, this feels like a satisfactory step, finally.
It's good. I'm all for this, but like, how many times, and this is the feeling that I get when I see something like this, and that is, what about us?
Yeah, I get that. I do.
Yeah.
And in reading the article, my quote-unquote hot take that's probably not accurate at all has to do with the sheer scale and magnitude of intentional civilian casualties. That seems to be the differentiator. And I'm not excusing any of the things that we've done in the past as a country. I'm just saying that there seems to be a clear-cut difference in intent in a way that seems to be where the distinction is and why nobody has argued it against us so far. But I don't know how accurate that quote-unquote hot take is, and I certainly would not stand my ground on it at all.
Yeah, it needs to be done, but there's the saying, maybe it's not a saying, maybe it's from the Bible. He who has no sin cast the first stone.
Yeah, let he who has no sin cast the first stone.
The point of that is the point that was being made with that comment was different than what we're talking about here, because what government couldn't cast a stone? What government has the ability to cast the stone in that regard? Probably none of them. But so nobody is sinless, so let's we do need to proceed. So it's tricky.
Yeah, very much so. And it's a good indicator of some of the intricacies that we're going to explore in a bit.
Yep. Bite 2.
The second one, this is just kind of positive. The Senate has moved forward with confirming Jackson as the Supreme Court, or the new appointee to the Supreme Court. And as of recording, at least 3 GOP representatives have also voted in favor of what's the first step, like excusing her of her current duties that you have to vote on, and then it's vote on confirmation. And there's some procedural step that was almost exclusively along party lines, as expected, and which is atrocious in and of itself. But at least 3 GOP representatives voted appropriately based on actual qualifications and understanding of everything. So it's very likely that by the end of the week, she will be confirmed as the new Supreme Court Justice.
Who is she replacing?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I cannot remember for the life of me his name, and I should, because it was in the news enough recently, and I don't know the justices that well.
Yeah, I know Clarence Thomas.
Especially in light of recent developments.
Yeah.
And I know Kavanaugh because he's been appointed while I've been somewhat paying attention.
I would say there is, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's just name recognition.
No, it's more than that, though. Controversy over his appointment.
Well, that's name recognition. I only recognize the name because he was a controversial appointee, just like Coney Barrett.
Yeah, I was going to say Coney Barrett. Did Trump nominate 2?
I think so.
Just Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett. Gorsuch. Gorsuch was one of them, wasn't he? A Trump nominee?
Maybe. I honestly don't know for sure. Like the only other one I know by name is Roberts, and that's just because he's Chief Justice. What
about Sotomayor? Is she still?
Sotomayor is still there. I do remember seeing her name recently. Like, if you say them, I will recognize them, but producing them just off the top of my head is difficult. I did think, though, that the fact that the vote is almost purely political line drawn was worth noting, because it just shows how ridiculous our current political system is. Like, how can you take a judge who has a very consistent record and very much in line with her peers and vote against her? Like, this is the first one in history, in what I recall of recent history, that hasn't had a big controversy, hasn't had some fairly major leanings one way or another, but has been very consistent and very much qualified for the role. And here she's being attacked on political grounds.
Yeah. So I did a quick look up to see who the justices were, and Gorsuch was appointed by Trump. He replaced Scalia.
I remember Scalia's name. I honestly did not recognize that he was no longer a justice.
He died, I think.
I mean, it's an appointment for life, so it's not surprising. It's just I didn't realize he wasn't part of the court anymore.
Yeah, he died in 2016.
It just goes to show that this is definitely an area that I should be more focused as an average American in at least understanding, given the ramifications.
He was nominated by Reagan, I remember him. I did not like him. I was going to say Trump has 3 nominees. Obama 2. W has 1. Alito. I remember Alito. I remember him.
I remember the name when it said, yeah.
Clinton still has someone on the bench. Breyer. I don't remember him.
Isn't Breyer who's being replaced?
Is it?
Isn't he the one that's retiring?
Well, I mean, it's great that he is, because he's pretty old. He's was born in 1938. So
I think it's Breyer that's retiring. And this goes back to when I hear the names, I recall at least something about them, but I could not have produced Breyer's name for trivia or something.
Right. Well, so that's the thing. There was a lot of. This is becoming quite a bite. But there was a lot of controversy over Ginsburg not retiring because there was controversy over her not retiring during the Trump administration. During the Obama administration, because she was getting along and they wanted to be able to replace her with another liberal interpreting judge. So,
and we've seen that strategy typically would have been better than what we got, you would think, except that we also saw Obama blocked from appointing another judge.
For a goddamn year.
So who's to say that maybe the same thing wouldn't have happened either way, and she was just trying to make it to a politically favorable climate to be able to retire. Like I can see both sides of that particular situation.
Yeah, but then they rammed Coney Barrett through in the last year, and that was just such bullshit. I really dislike her.
I
don't like her at all, but she's not an idiot.
I agree. I've been surprised by some of her rulings. It's just the things that I do disagree with her on are very, very pronounced.
Yeah, I was going to say Kavanaugh is not an idiot either. Well, he's not an idiot, but he's kind of a moron.
I get that.
So, yeah.
So with that, how about we dive into the show topic?
Oh, there you go. Hey, check this out. Here's the situation. Say you out with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You're at school, you at a club or something, getting busy. All right, you just having fun. Somebody steps up to you and they tell you they want to rumble. All right, now just stop for a second. Before you lose your head, get all crazy and toss your hands up, just think. The person that uses their head can always defeat the person that's just trying to use their hands. Now remember that, because the more you know.
So I at least gave you forewarning on the topic as well. I'm not going to pretend that I'm blindsiding you with it during recording. But I got to thinking about the way we hear people talk about violence in general. And you hear the extreme argument of violence is never the answer. And you have people who believe this to such an extent that they will not raise a hand to defend themselves either. Like complete, pure, ideological pacifism. It's an extreme, or it's the extreme, I guess, if you think about the continuum, but it is an approach that exists, most famously among specific sects of Buddhist monks, right, where you have just complete and utter refusal to commit an act of violence to the extent of being willing to lose your own life to avoid committing an act of violence, just to set the stage.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
I was going to say I briefly subscribed to that kind of thinking, but it was never put to the test, and I moved on from it.
And this is where I started to think of this as kind of an interesting topic, because the closest form of pacifism that I personally can understand, and again, it's not acknowledged existence, it's just that I can wrap my head around, is violence is the answer of last resort. Like, I will do everything I can to avoid violence, but in the event that I can't avoid violence, I will defend myself, or those I love, or those whose lives I feel matter to me more so than the aggressor in that situation.
I mean, that's like, I've even taught my kids, like violence is the worst answer. I don't even know that it's the last answer, but it's usually the worst answer. But at some point, there is a time to become. There is a time and a place. And I've told my kids, it's like, if you ever see somebody being bullied, you stop the bully. You get as many people as you possibly can to stop the bully. And if it requires violence to stop the bully, so be it.
It's an interesting distinction that. So I would place it very similar to the way I phrased it, but still slightly a different viewpoint. And it's interesting to hear it phrased that way. I hadn't thought about that specific avenue of thought. But what prompted a lot of this was thinking about how much of my choice in how I view that answer is driven from other experiences versus whether violence maybe isn't the answer in a situation that I might view it as the answer because I don't see an alternative.
Well, that's why I'm saying it's not necessarily the last answer.
I get that. And I think a lot of when to choose violence as the answer is predicated on education around alternative answers. How many people think about... Well, let's back up slightly and let's use the example you gave, the bullying example, because it's a good example. If you see someone being bullied, interjecting into that is absolutely the right course of action, right? I don't think there's any way to describe it otherwise.
And I think, numbers are important too.
True. Very true. But often we view interjection into that as restraint or, some physical stoppage of one person engaging in an act. The alternatives to that are often not apparent, but you could actually block access between the people without engaging in violence as well, if that was something you thought to do and you had a group of people to do it.
Right.
And where I was going with this example is how I was thinking through it was far more basic. It was, if I am being threatened, and let's have this hypothetical scenario where I'm in a wide open plain, so there's no dodging into a building and locking a door or escape in, like physical separation. And I know that this other person is coming toward me with a weapon of some sort and is faster than me. So eventually they will reach me, regardless of how much I try to evade the confrontation. What would my reaction be?
This is classic horror movie stuff.
It is, but it's create a scenario that is as limited in variables as possible. Right. To think about the actions that you would take,
right? Because the point of the hypothetical is to get to this place where you have to confront somebody who wants to do you harm,
right? And like me personally, I will absolutely respond with violence to protect myself. Not only do I feel the deeply human thought of self-preservation to be compelling, but I kind of like living, and I don't really want to suffer the alternative currently.
Right.
Like this is all classic self-preservation. That's the whole point of the idea. But how much of that is actually an innate need or desire for preservation, and how much of it is confidence in my ability to respond because I have been taught different ways to respond? And this is kind of the crux of how I wanted to explore it, because I can't think of the alternative mindset because I've had the self-preservation mindset ingrained, not only from just general conversation and upbringing, but from actual like training and practice and exposure to self-defense as a actual approach. And I can't separate that. But and this may be me recalling incorrectly because I don't think we've ever actually talked about it. But how much of that is a result of my individual exposures versus just innate human desire for life?
So I think the drive and the will to live is quite strong in most people. I think that you find out, I don't think most people ever get that sort of kind of testing in their life. I don't even think most people get in a position where they have to defend themselves. Like I know that I come from a place of privilege. I know I come from a place of privilege regarding this, but like I've never in my life had to defend myself or anyone, and so I don't know. I'd like to think that I know what I would do and not shut down and be able to do it. I think I would. I think I have that sort of drive, and I think that I would. I might. I am not a violent person, but I am more than willing to engage in acts of violence to protect, defend somebody that, not just somebody that I love, but somebody that's indefensible. So, but I've it's never been tested.
I like that you brought in the other point. I wasn't quite planning to go there yet, but let's take it a step further. Just because this actually, when we have good flowing conversation, this is what happens anyway. That aspect of protecting someone who is incapable of defending themselves. This is an area that I've kind of gone back and forth on over time before finally really reaching an understanding of how I would judge it with age. Like it's something that as I was younger, it's like I would like to think that I would do something. Well, maybe I would avoid it because I've been taught that I still should try to avoid altercation and instead bring an authority into the figure to break it up, not me myself. All that to say, I have realized that if I see something like that happening, I'm absolutely willing to interject. It took me a while to get to the point where I reached that conclusion, not because of a lack of desire, but because I kept getting conflicting outer viewpoints on would that be the appropriate thing to do or not. Because depending on who you talk to, often you will hear, no, you shouldn't jump in. You should grab, some person in authority to interject, not you directly, assuming that you could get some person of authority relatively quickly and relatively easily, right? Like there is an accessibility argument to that. I didn't understand those nuances for the longest time. It was more, okay, you're teaching me to avoid that physical altercation in every conceivable way if I can, and instead have someone else interject, assuming that I can get someone else to interject, before finally realizing, yeah, we're telling you these things to get you to understand that you have to assess the situation within the context of both of those spheres of influence. It may be that you are the only person capable of interjecting before someone is seriously injured, and it may be that you can let it go because you know that a block away is, a law enforcement officer or somebody that is supposedly capable of performing that interjection instead of you putting yourself in harm's way. But it was never about the interjection. It was about exposure to harm yourself and how to protect against that as much as possible. Because if you intervene in something, you have to be prepared to be hurt.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to understand the nuances of what was actually being taught there. I find that to be interesting because most people are never faced with the idea of thinking through that in the first place. And how many people would actually even understand the distinction between intervening because it's the right thing versus intervening in the way least likely to get more people hurt.
Right. I've always thought about it as something that, well, I've always thought of myself as a person who I'm not usually going to come up with like a zinger on the spot. Like that's not how my brain works. It's usually, 48 hours later. And so then like I decided that I need to be prepared for those kind of things where I would want a zinger that will come, 2 days too late. And so then I came up with this this all-purpose statement that I'll say, like if somebody says something and I wish I had a zinger that came to mind. Like I won't say never. It might have happened once or twice, but I now have I have a thing on deck at all times. And that thing is if somebody says something, I can just, the thing I have on deck came from the movie Tombstone. You've seen Tombstone, right?
Yes, many times.
Yes. I can't remember who I was talking to who had not seen Tombstone. I was like, oh my. Anyway, it is...
Real quick, before you continue, I
yeah.
had to actually legitimately go find a new copy because for some reason or another, my rip would only play up to what used to be the second disc. And so I had to find a Blu-ray that had the entire film on one disc to re-rip because I couldn't watch the last part of the movie because I couldn't find the original source material in my stash of discs to re-rip.
I have it on DVD, and I bought the Blu-ray to rip to get on because I wanted the Blu-ray copy. Anyway, it's a line from Doc Holliday, and it is, of course, and it is the line. I can't remember what Earp says to Holliday, but Holliday responds with, "That is a hell of a thing for you to say to me." Oh, it was when Earp tells Holliday that he doesn't have to, you don't owe me anything. And he says, that is a hell of a thing for you to say to me. And that's what I have on deck when somebody says something and I need, a zinger. And it has worked out quite well for the few times that I've gotten to use it. Anyway, I say all of that because I've also thought if I'm in a place where I see something that would require intervening, I need to be ready to go. Like, I need to be mentally prepared. And it's not like every day that I go out, I think mentally preparing to, beat somebody's ass because they're hurting somebody else or they want to hurt me. Like, it's not that. It's just that, what am I going to do when I see something that I shouldn't see? Because I don't want to be paralyzed with fear. I don't want to be like, oh, should I just step in? And it's like, you don't have to start with the violence, but you've got, but there's a set of actions that you can start with, and it is likely going to lead to that, take you down that road. So, but I've just thought about what do I do? Because if I'm not prepared, I don't know. I want to be a person who will intervene in a situation that needs intervention, and I've got to mentally prepare myself for that.
And just to be clear, both of us are saying the same thing, that hopefully that initial intervention is verbal and that's all it takes.
Yes. Yep.
You always want to attempt to diffuse a situation without physical confrontation. Because the moment physical confrontation enters, someone is going to be hurt in some way.
The closest I've gotten to this was maybe a year or two ago. I was sitting out at a restaurant, in the UAB area, and I was noticing this couple, and the way they were talking to each other just didn't seem right. Nothing happened. It just didn't seem right, and it was happening publicly, and I'm sitting there uncomfortable. And then I noticed somebody I was there with, he was also uncomfortable by the same thing. And I said, you see what I see, right? And he's like, yes. I was like, let's make sure everything's okay. So we both got up. And he's a bigger dude than me. So we approach the situation and we say, hey, is everything okay? And it seemed like everything, after through the course of conversation, it did seem like everything was okay. Like the woman, the concern was that there was a woman and a man, and there was some unhappiness there maybe in the moment, and we were concerned that she was for her well-being. And so we both, the guy that was there was like, hey, leave us alone. I was like, hey, you keep quiet right now. I want her to answer. Are you, I was like, are you okay? I was like, do you need anything? Do you need us to contact anybody? No. Everything's okay. I was like, well, the way you two are conducting yourselves, it's giving us, and I'm sure other people, cause for concern. Please be mindful of that. And that's how it ended. And everything seemed to be fine. But it was just like, it's where we approached where it's like, I think both of us were ready. Like, if this goes south, like I know I walked up to that situation. I didn't want to go alone. I wanted to take a guy who was bigger than me, and which is fun to say. And I wanted, because like I was like, this dude could become violent, and I didn't want to be unprepared for that.
I do think it's so. This is not directly related to what you've just described, but I do think it's interesting that there's a certain upbringing aspect to this as well that makes it difficult to isolate what is something learned or something innate versus repetitive exposure to these types of situations. As you were describing it, I was reminded of a situation long time ago at this point. I had gone out with a group of friends. There were 5 or 6 of us. I don't remember for sure, but same group that used to consistently get together, and we'd have drinks and pizza at a place, and then when we would go other places, we would often go together as well. And in this particular case, we were going to see a movie, and I don't even remember which one, but same group of people. Every week we were together for something anyway. And there was one other guy that roughly my age, kind of similar approach to things, very similar mental place, etc. And it was funny, like we went into an area and we heard something, and it was something that was mundane. It was just an elevated voice, right? But I turned kind of quickly because my first thought was just, what is that particular noise? What's going on? And his first response was, I don't know what's happening. I'm ready. I have your back. Kind of thing, because he felt the response of the turn. Yeah. And it was funny because we talked about it afterwards. Like, he and I both grew up in areas where it's not like it was normal to be, physically confrontational, but it was normal that if you didn't know what something was or what was happening, to be prepared to be physically confrontational. So even though that wasn't necessarily something that happened often, it was the kind of thing that he sensed that uncertainty about what the noise was, trying to understand it, and was just, nope, I'm here with you. I'm ready to go. What's happening? And same type of thing I would have had if he had had the same response instead of me. But I find this example to be both hilarious in many regards because there was, absolutely nothing to it, and illustrative of what I am trying to kind of drill into, in that I would be ready to have that same reaction based on exposure to that being a better approach to understanding my environment, and training on when there's something uncertain, being, guarded and prepared for anything being the next possible step. And I can't separate that preparedness with anything else because it's been just repetitively ingrained over time.
I just think it's one of those things, or it really, I guess the thing that the place where I'm going to, and I kind of want to get past this spot, but it's like, do you choose to be a person that wants to do something about a thing and you have to prepare for it? Or are there people that will always do the thing without thinking? And I feel like I'm never the person that is going to do the thing without having prepared for it, regardless of what my desires are.
I like that you phrase it that way. And here's why. I think the average person is going to always be the latter, that has to think about it and be prepared. I think the only people who are going to default to intervention without thinking about it are people who have specifically prepared for that potential on a very consistent or a very structured basis. And the reason I say it that way is if I were to try to remove some of my past experiences and kind of view objectively what influences where I am today as best I can, which is inherently a flawed exercise. Like I want to make sure I recognize that. But if I try to remove those things that I can definitively point to that have shaped my mindset today as best I can, I would absolutely think that I would be approaching it identically to the way you've described. If that's reality or not, that's up for debate, right? There's no way I can separate my experiences from objectively trying to view the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like I would have the confidence to engage in that intervention without thinking, had I not had very specific experiences prior. I just don't see how I would arrive at my current mindset without some very specific things having occurred.
For me, it was taking, I'm not good thinking on my feet real fast, like especially in conversation, like with, trying to come up with a zinger. It really was from that, because like that happens all the time. And if you watch a certain kind of movie, you see in the movies where people are really good, but it's all scripted. But I know people that can respond with the right thing at the right time. And, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not good, sometimes it can be bad, but that's neither here nor there. But from that, noticing about myself is like, I never wanted to find out if I would or would not respond correctly. I felt like it was too important for me to not test those waters or find out what kind of person are you. Because from time to time, we can decide what kind of person we want to be.
Well, I want to take that a step further, because it's very much, we are completely in control of being and deciding to be the person we want to be. We often will ascribe external forces to influencing those choices, but no matter the situation, no matter who you are, no matter what is transpiring, you choose to be whatever person you want to be in that moment or from that moment forward. No one can change that other than you.
Yeah. So it kind of leads me to this thing when in my early 20s, I used to romanticize military service, and there was a man in my life who was much older than me, and he had served in the military. And I remember stating to him, I was like, something along the lines of like, that would have some comment that was romanticizing military service. And he said, no. He's like, it was something along the lines of becoming a man. And then, he's like, no. He's like, The military is just it's a catalyst. Whatever you're going to be, and the military service just makes it happen faster. And I remember that's really sticking with me. And, it seemed like a relevant thing to say here.
No, I think it is. I want to extrapolate that just a little bit further, because everyone's story has a catalyst. Some may happen later than others. But when you were describing that, the thing that I was thinking of is over time, growing up, I remember many times thinking about military service as being romanticized in the same way, most likely. I mean, we are from the same general era, even if we have some disparate views on certain subsets of that era. But the one that was often something that I looked to as an activity that was placed above others. Like I wouldn't say on a pedestal, but something that I held in higher regard than other activities, was the pursuit and study of one of the martial arts. And I think part of that is driven from growing up in an era where this became more prominent in media and entertainment.
Oh, hell yeah.
And part of it also being just my interest in those arts in general, and how to differentiate which is the driving factor and which isn't is completely impossible at this point. But it's the same idea, right? The pursuit of this activity would theoretically lead to evolution into manhood, or at least some other iteration of who I would become, even if it wasn't this whole child to man transition, right? And I didn't actually study any martial art until I was well beyond the transition into adulthood. I just didn't have the opportunity. When I eventually did have the opportunity, I chose to pursue an interest. But when I did, I very quickly realized how much I misunderstood about what it meant to become a student of one of the arts, or one of the martial arts. And I'm glad that I very quickly understood that difference and changed my perspective as I pursued that study, because I got more out of it as a result. But I think all of us latch on to something that provides that same catalyst. For some people, it is absolutely military service. For some, it's college, as simple as pursuing higher education. And for some, it's something that starts as an interest in a hobby that evolves into something more. But that's the typical growth pattern we see in youth in the United States, because we're not exposed to these same things that would be catalysts prior to our voluntary engagement in them post-education. I assume we're going to pause there, or you don't have another response?
I don't know how to... There's a different set of things that I wanted to talk about.
We can pivot to them, because I realize that doesn't really lend itself to a response.
Yeah.
It's more my observation based on how I progressed that was triggered by, something that you mentioned.
Yeah, no, and it's one of the, I was going to say, like, it's I'd always wanted to do something like that, but there was never, I don't know, it was never prioritized. I think that's the best way to put it. I've never prioritized that sort of training. Always interested, never prioritized it. But it made me, go ahead.
just to interject real quick, like for me, it was just never an option until I could fund it myself.
Right. I don't know that it would have been an option when I was a kid, maybe, but I can see how like it would have been discouraged. And this is not necessarily, I don't know that you would necessarily include it in the realm of violence, but I did do like proper wrestling, like in, I don't know, sometime in elementary school, maybe 5th grade, which is really young to do something like that. But I mean, that's where you start. But there's some level of, would you consider that violence or?
It is.
Yeah.
In
okay.
general, but
it's not.
It's
controlled.
It's a sport. It's
Yeah.
a competition. It's a way of growing confidence.
Right. Nobody's there trying to hurt the other opponent. You know, no one, those in competition are not attempting to hurt one another. Usually, that's not the goal. But the only other thing that I can think of the violence that I engaged in was, played American football in 5th grade as well. And then as an adult, I played rugby just a little bit. And that, I guess, I feel like maybe I'm so desensitized to it that I wouldn't consider it violence. But I mean, it does involve, like, I'm going to use my body to stop your body. Like, there's going to be physical contact. There's not hitting. There's tackling, which is different than hitting. I don't know.
Well, and this goes back to why I thought this was a fascinating topic, because the nuance of how do you define violent altercations varies. Like, you could take any physical interaction and view it as a violent altercation if either party did not desire the action.
Right.
And
I was going to say
go ahead.
I was going to say sports is maybe considered normalized violence.
Yes. That's a good way to think of it.
Safe violence, perhaps.
Normalized, supposedly safe violence.
Intended safety with the intention of safety.
Yes. And the only reason I even draw the distinction is because obviously we have a long-standing argument about concussions in American football.
Oh.
There's the same debate in European football. Like, there are plenty of things that indicate it's not necessarily safe in the way it's done, but it is in general intended to be safe, recognizing that physical contact will lead to injury.
Sort of.
Yeah.
I remember somebody asking me, "Is like, how do you make American football safer?" And I was like, "Take away their pads." And they're like, that won't make it safer. I was like, I guarantee you that it will.
Yeah, you'll actually see restraint at that point.
Yeah, you won't see spirit. Like, yeah. So that's a whole tangent we don't have to go down at the moment. But what I wanted to pivot to, if you're ready for me to pivot there,
absolutely, let's go for it.
And I've had discussions about this because people want to say violence is not okay. And like the people that I've like disagreed with violence not being okay recently has been centered around the Black Lives Matter movement, where people have told me, they're really quick to jump on that violence is not okay. And I say, sometimes violence is the only alternative that you have. When you attempt to do a peaceful protest, when you have tried every way you possibly can, and when you get to a point where you don't feel like you have any other response, we might call that being cornered. The response, whether it is good or not, will likely be violence.
The way you described violence is maybe never the appropriate. What was the phrase?
It's usually
never a good answer.
It's never a good answer.
Yeah, I think that is a better descriptor of what you're describing in general, because it very adequately or very appropriately encapsulates a fundamental problem. You want to bring awareness to a social issue, an issue that is very obvious and apparent for those paying attention. And you want to do so in a way that provokes engagement, provokes conversation, provokes change. The moment violence becomes the method of engagement is the moment that you lose the engagement of a lot of those people that you need engagement from in order to effect change, which is a perfect illustration of violence may be the only answer left at this point, or maybe it's the only perceived answer left, but it's also the most detrimental.
Yeah.
And there's no good answer for that, unfortunately, because we do reach a point where people don't listen to words, or people don't listen to fact, or people don't listen to any level of logical reasoning. And what sparks their attention is some act of physical altercation or violence, which unfortunately is necessary to spark that level of interest, but also immediately stops engagement.
You know, the thing that I have found in in this kind of conversation is to double down on the violence, and that is to say, I'm surprised that we don't have more violent altercations. I'm surprised that there aren't more riots. I'm surprised that there isn't more destruction of private property. I'm surprised that there aren't more people, in the streets burning things down. It surprises me how little violence has happened. And I found that is like, for me, that's the place I take it in a conversation like this, because when you want to vilify a group of people who at points their only response is violence, then because of where society has put them, not the person that you're talking to in the conversation individually has put them there, but where our society has put people, it actually truly surprises me that it hasn't become more violent, because it just seems like that was the only thing that got people's attention in 2020. It was the only thing that got people's attention in 1992.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Like, let's make a very specific example be what we point to actually drive the point home. How many people were concerned about excessive force without viewing the video evidence of George Floyd's murder? And how many people were absolutely repulsed and willing to attack law enforcement's use of excessive force after viewing George Floyd's murder? There is a point where actually seeing the sheer maliciousness of an act drives the point home.
Yeah. To be biblical, violence begets violence. We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.